Good. All right. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call to order the mid-year review for the Budget Committee for the City of Wilsonville. At this time, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Fitzgerald.
Here.
Member Akabal.
Here.
Member Linville. Member Barry.
Here.
Member Dunwell.
Here.
Member O'Neill.
Here.
Member Skull.
Here.
Member Russell. And Member Moulton.
Here.
Thank you.
And then can I just remind members of the Budget Committee and Council to turn your mic on when you're speaking, and then you can turn it off when you're...
Oh, thank you. Okay, with roll call complete at this time, I'd like to ask for if there's any public comment. See no public comment at this time, so I would like to turn it over to the finance team for the mid-year review. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'm Keith Katko. I'm the city's finance director, and with me tonight is Catherine Smith, the city's assistant finance director. And tonight we'll be presenting what we have come to call the mid-year review. This is, in a sense, really the kickoff of the city budget for 2023-24, so fiscal year end 24 process. And so we just click on these slides here. And is this the screen that's going out? Okay, just to make sure. So this is our agenda for tonight. The first thing we'll touch on is just to get everybody back on the same page. We'll start off with a very brief primer of the structure of how the finances at the City of Wilsonville operate. And then we'll follow up with a discussion of where the city will land financially at fiscal year end 23 for each operating fund. And this is a critical piece of the information that we need to determine each fund's ending fund balance, because that is the starting point of where we budget for this next fiscal year. And that becomes the budgeted beginning fund balance. So we have to know where we're ending to really start the budget process for next year. And within that discussion tonight, we'll kind of highlight the differences between the budget we created for this current year, which we did last year, and the reality that exists today, and explain all the variances of what we budgeted for last year and where we're missing or hitting that mark and what we're, accomplishing in that process. And at the end of the presentation tonight, we'll look at the general fund and do a quick 5-year forecast of that fund as well. We focus on the city's 11 operating funds because that's where the resources are. The decisions that for the wider vision of the future of the city revolve around these funds because that's where the resources are. And resources are collected and expended within those operating funds and are either transferred out to capital projects or spent within those operating funds. So because of that interplay with the CIP funds, in the mix this evening, we also have City Engineer Zach Weigel and Public Works Director Delora Kerber to give a brief update on a few of the major CIP projects tonight. We also have CD Director Chris Namsu here and Building Inspector Dan Carlson to give a brief update on what's happening with development in the city this fiscal year and how that's affecting the finances of the city as well. As we go through all these departments tonight, we have many of the directors of the city for those programs here in the audience, so they can come up at any time to offer additional context. So this is really a collaborative process here tonight and that's really on course with the finance department in general. In addition to Catherine here tonight, we move the budget forward every year with a whole team of finance employees, including our senior accountant, Dylan Jenkins, operations supervisor, Cricket Jones, and our accountant, Vinia Haberline, who's actually helping out on our Zoom meeting tonight. So big thank to them. This is a big process to kick off and really move forward this budget every year. So this is the financial structure of the city. The city, of course, uses fund accounting and has established separate funds for resources who have either been limited in their use by the city or other governing agency. The emphasis on fund accounting is accountability. We have an outside independent audit every year that not only attests to the financial statements of the city and looks at the internal controls, but also as well makes sure the resources within those funds are being put to use as intended. And that happens every year. We have an independent audit firm come in. Fund accounting is essentially a self-balancing financial system wherein the resources must equal the requirements. On the budget statements that we show you tonight, the ending fund balance really is called the contingency. So in lingo, you'll hear that word contingency, it's really the ending fund balance. And when we budget, we adopt everything, so which is the collection of operating capital project transfers and the contingency. So it ends up being a really large budget that we adopt every year. Last year it was $285 million. Reality, 50 million of that is the operating budget. We had a huge capital project budget this year of $88 million, so that's folded in that number, as well as transfers, and then the contingencies get budgeted, so that's why we end up with that $285 million budget every year that gets adopted by council. The city has 24 funds, 11 operating, 7 SDCs, and 6 capital funds, and the city's core fund, of course, is the general fund, which records all the resources, inflows and outflows not associated with any of the other operating funds that have been designated for specific purposes. It's kind of a mouthful, but I just wanted to get that structure out as we go forward. It kind of lays the foundation for everything else we do. This is kind of a visual attempt to present how the funds work. We have those 11 operating funds there, and on those I've put their major funding sources for each that are associated with those funds. Of course, general fund handles all the city property taxes. The community development is funded through fees and permits. Building inspection fund is funded also by permits. Transit has its own resource, and so forth down the line. Those are all the operating funds that we'll talk about tonight. How these kind of interplay with the other, especially the capital funds and the SDC funds, is the operating funds, of course, provide the resources for those capital funds, as well as the SDC funds. And then in the process, the capital funds will kick back money to the community development fund based on what we call overhead, or our engineers. They track their time and they're able to charge to those projects, which will mean that money particularly can go back into the general fund or the community development fund to fund their salaries. So that's kind of a visual attempt at explaining the circle of life here of fund accounting. Just 3 more points on budgetary control here. The annual budgets for all funds are adopted on a basis consistent with ORS 294, and that's where we get our marching orders for this whole budget process, is within the ORS. And one other final really important point of here at the city, how budgetary control is afforded is when we adopt the budget, or when you are reviewing the budget, you're reviewing and approving a budget at the fund level, but within that fund level, there are specific budgets for each operating program, which are the departments, so be it finance, HR, those all have specific budgets, or it's by capital project, or debt service, or transfers, or contingency. So within any fund, there's those 5 levels of budgetary control. So for instance, we can't use debt service to fund library, and we can't use library to fund parks and recreation. Those all have parameters around them. So that's kind of the budgetary control that we're talking about. And a few slides just to provide a little bit of economic context to our discussion tonight. These are, of course, the big 3 factors of the budgetary ramifications that everybody intuitively is aware of as you step into any store, and they affect the city as well. These are year over year, so there's this December CPIU, and then there's the December 22 CPIU. So those are back-to-back inflationary increases. It was 6.8 in December 2021, and another 6.2 in December. It's just an indication of the cost of living going up across the board for everything. You go to the store, eggs are more expensive. We're finding that here at the city as well. And as Zach and Dan Carlson may mention, The other index, the construction cost index, which is a basket of construction goods that they measure inflationary, is even higher. So we're battling that. And then the unemployment rate is really low, 4.2% in December of 2021, and it's 4% in December of 22. So the interplay of all these three statistics is up for debate, but the practical reality is it's expensive out there, there aren't enough workers, and money itself is actually getting more expensive. You can see that Federal Reserve rate, 0.15% back in December of 2021. It's 4.5% in December 22, and they raised it another 0.25% today. So we're now at 4.75. So you're going out for lending, your car payment or whatever just got more expensive today. In that particular, that Federal Reserve rate is just an amazing escalation of an increase in a one-year period. To go from 0.15, the city invests where we invest our fund balances with the state of Oregon to the extent we can. It's capped at a certain level, $50 million, and then we have to go out and buy U.S. treasuries or corporate debt. So at that time, on the books, we were looking for investments at 0.15, and we're buying them. With our investment policy, we're limited to an 18-month purchase. So we're finally getting rid of some of those ridiculously low investments, because today when you go out and buy a U.S. Treasury, you can get it at 4.5% or even higher. So the effect is real for the city because it affects our interest earnings, and then it affects any type of borrowing we may need to do. You may recall, I guess it was last year we went out for the Public Works Complex, and Laura will talk about that a little bit more. We secured a loan for 2.24%. So it's a pretty good loan. It was a 15-year term, so we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Today, if we went out for debt, we're looking at 4 or 5% to get some kind of lending like that. I like this quote I found from the Oregon economist. He said, "The sharp rise in interest rates this year is akin to taking one's foot off the gas and slamming on the brakes. The car will shake and slide and skid, and the ultimate question is, does it end up in the ditch, or is the driver able to pull out of it? We'll see," he says. He's expecting, or the state is expecting, a moderate recession, and only a moderate recession because of that unemployment rate, or the unemployment rate so low. There's such a need for workers that it'll be mitigated. And the reason for that unemployment rate being so low is, I don't know, where did everybody go? Part of it, according to the state economic advisor, is because of demographics. People just aging out of the workforce, or at a certain level not wanting to work anymore at all. And so it's created, especially with the baby boomer generation coming out, perhaps. There's a whole myriad of reasons, of course, for that unemployment rate, but that affects us in the city as well. As we go along here tonight, you're just going to see a lot of vacancies in some of the departments that we face. So it's a little bit of an economic context brush. So first off, we'll get into the CIP, and we'll have Zach Weigel come up and talk about where we are in some of those big significant projects. We had the water treatment plant expansion project this year, the biggest CIP we've ever had at the city. And he'll talk about that and a few other projects, and then we'll have Delora come up and see where we are with that magnificent Public Works building that is in process right now. You can see this was the CIP budget, $88 million. We're anticipating by the end of the year we'll probably expend half of it. Some of that is because on some of those projects, we budgeted the full cost of the project, and they'll just spill over into future years. And then, there's a myriad of reasons that there is a differential, including the vacancies in the engineering department. I'll turn it over to Zach, our city engineer, who'll just give a brief update on some of the significant projects.
Thank you, Keith. As Keith mentioned, my name's Zach Weigel, city engineer. Good evening, budget committee members. And so, yeah, I thought I'd touch on our four biggest kind of visible projects, as Keith mentioned. The first one is the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant expansion. We're going from 15 million gallons per day to 20 million gallons per day. This project's been under construction for a year now. We had a total construction budget this year of $26.8 million. That's one of the projects that we did budget the entire amount this fiscal year, knowing that it was going to take 2 to 2.5 years to construct. So I like to show some pictures of what the money's actually being spent on. So I included a few pictures in the slide of the work that's going on at the treatment plant. You can see in the upper left-hand corner that you may have noticed that the park at the treatment plant was closed for a period of time this summer. That was so we could do seismic improvements to the clear well, and that's what you see there. We removed the soil off the top of that and backfilled it with a low density fill, so there's not so much weight on top of that clear well, and it makes it meet seismic requirements. And then in the picture in the middle there is construction of a new building, the switchgear building for the treatment plant expansion. And then I really like the picture in the lower left-hand corner. That's a crane sitting on a barge in the middle of the river, working on the enlarging the size of the inlets for the water treatment plant. So. Yeah, so we're expecting to spend about $13.7 million this year on that project, and the rest will be, as Keith said, spent next year.
Just interjection, just to remind people that 1/3 of this project is being paid for by the city of Sherwood. 1/3 is being paid for by water SDC funds, so the development coming in, and then 1/3 is paid for by water operating funds.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, next slide. So 5th Street Kinsman Road Extension is the next project. This project has been under construction for 2 years, and I am very excited that it is finally going to be finishing up here by the end of this fiscal year. So with one exception, we're tracking the railroad crossing. The signal equipment is a little, we're running into some supply chain issues, but it is going to be done this summer at least. So again, this is an $11.3 million roadway extension of 5th Street and Kinsman Road, new railroad crossing, extension of the Ice Age Tonkin Trail. You can see a new intersection on the map there with 5th Street and Kinsman Road. There's 2 bridges over Coffee Creek. That's the one in the bottom corner there is the bridge over Kinsman, or the Kinsman Road Bridge. That picture was taken about 2 months ago, and that bridge is almost completed. And then in the upper right-hand corner is kind of aerial view looking down the new Kinsman Road. You can see the Ice Age Tonkin Trail extension there at the bottom of the picture with 5th Street off to the right. And then in the middle picture is a picture of 5th Street extension that's nearly completed. So we're expecting to finish out this year spending about $7.3 million on this project.
And this project is one of the last, it's split between the Urban Renewal District and the city's picking up a portion of it. It's one of the last projects on the year 2000 urban renewal, which renewal plan that is set to close next year.
Right, and we did extend water and sewer with this project, so there was a significant contribution from the water SDC and the sewer SDC. Next project is the Beckman Road Corridor. This is a $31 million project. Over 5 CIP projects are included in this. This is another one where we'd even have the contractor on board, and we hadn't started design when we budgeted this project last year, so we included the entire budget for the project in this year's budget, knowing, again, that it's going to roll over for the next couple years. We're projecting we're going to spend around $7.9 million this year on this project. We've been in a lot of design, and that's about to change. We're have a lot of contract packages coming to council over the next 3 months for approval, and we're expecting construction to begin here in about 2 months on a temporary traffic signal at 65th and Stafford, and then the sewer line construction on Beckman Road itself. And then I included some of the most recent photo or images of the project that we just had an open house at Meridian Creek Middle School a couple weeks ago. And this has a lot of funding sources. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
It's partially, yeah, it's a multitude of funding sources. I mean, we've taken to council in terms of informational sharing at that point. Part of it is urban renewal. Again, it's in that year 2000 urban renewal plan. It'll be the last official project of that plan. And we're actually able to stop the tax increment from the year 2000 plan at the end of this year. And that project will just remain in there until that, we don't need any more tax increment money. It'll just remain as part of that urban renewal plan until it is completed. Basically, we don't need any more tax increment because we've paid off all the debt in that year 2000 plan, as well as reached the maximum in debt. This is kind of a sidebar of urban renewal, but we can't take any more tax increment. So that tax increment, we stopped collecting it. It's about $4 million a year, so that gets redistributed out to all the other taxing jurisdictions, as well as part of that, about 20% of that comes back to the city of Wilsonville. So it'll be about $800,000 influx into the city's general fund next year. Kind of a sidebar to that project, but that is a huge project, of course, still underway.
And then lastly, I wanted to mention our annual street maintenance program. That map is a little difficult to read, but our plan for this year is to do some paving around Parkway Avenue up by behind Target, Beckman at the Beckman overcrossing of I-5, and then Wilsonville Road and kind of in the Boones Ferry intersection area, and then around Rose Lane as well. So right now we're just about to start whenever we do street maintenance, we are required to upgrade curb ramps and pedestrian push-button signals to current ADA standards. So that work is about to start on all those intersections here in the next couple weeks, and then paving will start. We're in design right now with the paving, and that's going to start here probably in June, and it will trail into next fiscal year. So those are the 4 projects I had. I think Laura was going to talk about the Public Works Complex. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the other, I counted them up, 105 capital projects, but
Now might be a good time to pause, Chair, to see if there's any questions from the Budget Committee.
Do we have any questions?
Matt, how many people attended that middle school meeting?
yeah, we had about, there was a lot of couples there, so we estimate about 40 to 50 people. It was well attended. Yeah.
Question.
Neil?
I'm just curious, we're talking about interest rates going up. We have these projects. Is there any impact on these projects directly where the contractors are coming back? Are they locked in to a commitment to their what they provide? Or are they going to come back saying, well, it's more expensive and we bring up more?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have that situation with the 5th to Kinsman project because it's been under construction for 2 years. It was right before, all the cost increases had just started, so they are locked in. We have had requests from some of the subcontractors, like paving, to issue a change order for the cost increases, and so far we have not done that.
Yeah, because it just wouldn't be an interest rate issue, it's just the CPI, and, they're facing all their construction costs.
Yeah, as you can imagine, like the cost of, conduit, pipe, asphalt is all skyrocketed, yeah.
Has the supply chain issues affecting any of the project?
Yes, so that project, like I mentioned, the rail signal is really it, and that's because it came towards the end of the project, and not something we contract with the railroad to do that work, so it's not something that the city is purchasing, but that's been the one thing that we've had trouble getting. But on that project, it was kind of early enough that we kind of missed that. I will say on Beckman, we're kind of lucky that we're kind of at the, we've kind of got past that, and we realize that it's an issue now, so we're planning for it. When we start bringing these construction packages to City Council, you'll see that we're pre-purchasing sewer pipe before, and then on the next contract, it will include the installation costs. So we want to get those materials ordered so that they'll be there on time to finish the project on time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have a question. In the case of, or for these CIP projects, in the case of, where there's a difference because of inflation or supply chain issue and all that, and the contractor challenges that, what's the process there to negotiate with the city if that does become a challenge?
Well, so we have contract specifications that guide what cost increases they can ask for.
So it's fixed up front?
Yeah, it's fixed up front, right. So there has to be a change. So like, I think a good example is like if there's something unexpected that happens that we have to add to the project, then yes, then, there's a negotiation that happens there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. So for the Beckman project is near and dear to my heart because I live right at the off the entrance of Sherman. But I'm just curious, how does one budget such a large project before you have the planning completed? And you're talking about making accommodations for things now, but I'm just interested how that works.
Yeah, so we do, as part of, that's a really good question, and I could spend a long time talking about it. But basically, at the master planning level, we come up with cost estimates that have a low and high number, right? And you come up with a cost estimate based on other similar work, and it's like a 30% below and a 50% high, and that's kind of where we start. And then that's updated as we go through, as we kind of refine the project, as we start getting into design, that number is always refined, and we're always trying to stay within that number, yeah.
So in that example,
If, when we do the next year budgeting cycle, the estimates have changed, does it just make an adjustment to the budget for that project?
Yeah, so we will adjust. So Keith and I will work together to look at what the revenue levels are and see what, if there are cost increases, where those can be accommodated from.
thank you.
Yeah.
One question, you mentioned, so some of these large projects that are part of the urban renewal areas that are going to be closing down. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the Brown Road project as well, since I'm remembering, is that West Side or year 2000?
That's the last remaining project
Yeah.
on the west side urban
West Side,
renewal.
okay. I was wondering where that was, since we've kind of got a timeline of that shutting down, or is it a similar
Well,
situation?
The year 2000 plan will shut, tax increment will shut this year. For the West Side Urban Renewal Plan, we will need to collect a little bit more increment next year, and that has the Brown Road project remaining on it. But at the end of June 2024, that's it for that project. That's it for that tax increment as well. So all that $5 million at that time for fiscal year 24-25 will be released back into the pool for general allocation to all the taxing entities, including the city of Wilsonville. And at that time, of that $5 million, probably $1 million of that will be dumped into the city's general fund, because we get a portion of that. But the last remaining capital project on the west side is the Brown Road.
Right, but the district can be closed out before that project is completed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just the last project that we said for that urban renewal district, so.
So it sounds like that project will be completed after the, is that what I'm hearing?
We need to get
Yeah.
some of these, we have a lot of big projects right now. We need to get a few of them completed before we take on another giant project. Yeah.
Will we start it before that date, that end date?
Yeah, I would imagine that we will. It's in this year's budget to start design, and it will be in next year's budget proposal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, of course, the other significant capital project is in facilities, and that is our Public Works Complex building, and Delora can talk a little bit about that. Just on the screen for you, to preface her discussion, is a $22.6 million project, and I displayed all the funding sources where the funds for that project have come from, financed through a combination of city reserves as well as a outside loan for $16.5 million. We did a 15-year loan at 2.24%, and that loan is construed so it can be paid off in full, in part, by fund or carried to full term. It's allocated amongst at least the water, sewer, stormwater, and roads operating funds. That is how it is financed anyway, and Delora can talk a little bit about the project.
Good evening, Budget Committee members. My name is Delora Kerber. I'm the Public Works Director. And part of the reason that it's spread across all those funds is because once Zach and his team gets done building these new capital projects, be it roads, water, et cetera, it's my group that goes in and takes care of it. So that's why it's kind of spread around there. The Public Works Complex has been in the works since 2015 when we identified the need for consolidating all of our functions into one location. Currently, we have our staff in one location and storage in another, equipment in yet another around. And so with that, then we move forward to purchase some land over near our smart fleet building. And we've been in process of designing and conceptually designing a facility that will take us long-term out to 20, 30 years, thinking about how the city's going to grow, what are the resources are going to be needed to take care of the assets within the city. And so as we are designing this complex, we thought about that, and we have areas of expansion both in the yard as well as the administrative buildings. And so this will allow us to have a secure site to put everything in one location. We'll have a large conference room similar to Willamette 1-2 that can function as a conference room or a training center for the city staff, as well as an incident operations center for any emergencies. As we're designing this complex, we ensure that the administration building, which is about a little over 16,000 square feet, is designed to a category for seismic, which means that it could be immediately reoccupied after a large earthquake. And we did that such that we have the ability to operate out of that building for not only Public Works, but the city as a whole. And then also we are putting some of our backup IT servers and such in the building as well. And then also with the warehouse that we're putting in, it's about 17,500 on site. It also is to a category 3, so we'd be able to get our equipment in and out. of that location. The usable yard itself is about 3.5 acres. You can see on the left there, this is where they have graded the site and they're ready for starting construction. So it's interesting, the topography of the land is, it sits higher on the east side and lower on the west side. So as we were going through design, that was one of the things that we took into consideration. So the administration building is 2 stories. It's the top story is at street level, and then the bottom story is at site grade level, and we're able to put our gender neutral lockers down there, some parking, as well as our mechanical buildings and such in that. One of the things that we will be doing also is following the state green energy technology requirement. So 1.5% of the total budget or construction costs will be going towards alternate energy. In this case, we're going to have solar panels on our warehouse. So we'll be taking care of that. As we went through the design, we took into consideration LEED as well as Green Global to think about how we could be more sustainable and energy efficient as we go forward. So just thought I'd share with you a couple pictures of what we have. On the left, as you can see, the grading.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. And on the right here is on the right side of the right picture that's the administration building, or at least the base floor, the basement or the lower level of the administration building. And then where you see a bunch of those little squares, that will be the warehouse. And so those are the foundations of that. So go to the next one. So this is kind of interesting. We started back in, we let the contract back in August of 2021. And so the contractor just hopped on it and started working. And so as you can imagine, they're starting the work into the fall, through the winter. And here they are, they're pouring some of the various foundations around, at night, all lit up, ready to go. They have just never taken a pause, and off we go forward. One of the questions about what about supply chain? So we're running into that as well, such as the electrical switchgear. The one that we had specified was going to take too long, that it would drag the contract schedule backwards. So the team got together, the architects, the owners, the city, as well as the contractor, and we strategized, was there a different brand or manufacturer that we could use that could help us meet our timeline? And so we had to do a little redesigning, reconfiguring, but that's what we did to ensure that it came back, and it was pretty much cost neutral. So it helped us meet our design. So next slide. So in here, just some more. Here is where they are. Is that the walls they're putting up there? Yeah. Okay. So this the administration buildings are it's called tilt-up concrete. So basically what they're doing right there is they're pouring a wall on the foundation of the building. And so once they are all done, they will stack up these walls, and then they will tilt them up, and then they will put them into place around the perimeter of the administration building. The warehouse is actually a prefabricated structural steel building. On the site also, we'll have a dewatering facility, we'll have storage bins, we will have a magnesium chloride tank, which we use for de-icing, as well as a pesticide trailer that we can use, and I think those are all the various things that we have. So there you're seeing a retaining wall going up. That is, again, as I mentioned with the grade elevations, there will be an upper parking lot and a lower parking lot. One of the things also we're doing with the administration building is having a area in which people could use for a public conference room that they could use here and there. So, and that's just more of the construction. Any questions?
I have a question. What percentage, you said you have a certain set aside for future growth. What percentage of the site is set aside for future expansion?
If I had to put a percent, see, it's hard to say percentage of the site. So the way it was designed is we have the administration building, the 2-story, 1,600 square feet, and we have ability to expand out to the north. But I'm not, off the top of my head, maybe another 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet for that. In the yard, we have the warehouse. And then there's an area off the edge, the western edge of the warehouse, in which we made sure nothing went in that location. So in the future, we could expand the warehouse to the west, another 2 bays.
Do you have a question? What percentage of the site is set aside for future growth? What percentage of the site is set aside for future expansion?
If I had to put a percent, see, it's hard to say percentage of the site. So the way it was designed is we have the administration building, the 2-story, 1,600 square feet, and we have ability to expand out to the north. But I'm not, off the top of my head, maybe another 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet for that. In the yard, we have the warehouse. And then there's an area off the edge, the western edge of the warehouse, in which we made sure nothing went in that location. So in the future, we could expand the warehouse to the west, another 2 bays.
I have a question. So completion date and move-in?
Yes, thank you. That was on my notes, I didn't read it. I'm so excited, the final inspection should occur like a year from today. So, in 2024. Likely the move-in would happen thereafter in February of 2024. I'm hoping that we will be fully in by March. So.
Other questions?
I have one more question. You talk about Public Works being located there. Are any of the other city services going to be utilizing the facilities?
We will be sharing part of the space with our Parks and Rec staff, recognizing that they will have their facility, their main facility will be here on the east side of I-5, but we made sure that as we did our planning, that we have space for them to put some of their equipment, especially putting some of their mowers under cover, so that they don't have to trailer it back and forth. They can just start from over there. So, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and so next we'll start with looking at the projections for all the city's operating funds. And the first operating fund we will look at is Transit Fund. Transit Fund accounts for the activities of the Wilsonville Transit System, South Metro Area Regional Transit. And this fund is moving from a beginning fund balance of $12.3 million to an ending fund balance of $15.8 million, an increase of $3.5 million. And so before I get into that, let me explain the structure of this presentation. This is a structure we've used for the past couple of years on how best to flush out the variances in open it up for any kind of questions on these. So what you're looking at here is, and we're going to go through all the 11 operating funds, and there is at least one slide each for the resources and the requirements, and they will balance. The balancing is consolidated in the ending fund balance of the requirement slide. So for this one, when I say we go from a beginning fund balance of $12.3 million to an ending fund balance of 15.8, it's always going to be highlighted in green. So the walkaway will be, that is the projected ending fund balance for this fund at June 30th, 2024. And that, when we come back in May, is what we're going to say is the beginning budgeted fund balance. So it'll be our starting point for the budget for this department, or this fund in general. And then at the bottom of that is just the differential. So there's a $3.5 million growth in this fund this year. And then we'll go over by revenue category and by expense category how that's happening. And you'll see all the revenue categories for this fund by row. Their budget in the yellow column is what we're estimating for this current year, and the remaining balance is kind of the variance with a percentage, and then any comments kind of to help explain either the variance or what's happening in the fund. Transit Fund, of course, is funded by a 0.5%, half of 1% of total employer payroll in the city. It represents about $1.5 million that we take in a quarter, and that for a year period represents about $1.2 billion in earnings in the city of Wilsonville. And that is the largest revenue source for this fund. We're estimating $6 million by year end, which is a little bit higher than we had projected. So we're really on track with that. The second largest funding source for transit, of course, are federal grants. And part of the reason for this growth in this fund has been over the past 3 years, there's been a lot of grant opportunities coming down from the federal government, in part because there's a recognition or a promotion of that transit is a vital public infrastructure program, and they didn't want to see it decimated during this COVID year. So the grants kind of flew in related to transit. In this current year, we picked up another $2.3 million in what they call the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds. So that helped in that year-end estimate there. You'll see intergovernmental revenues expecting $2.6 million. The other third largest funding source for this fund, and you'll see this on your your paychecks is the 0.001 or 0.1% of, and this is an employee tax statewide, and this is our allocated proportion that we receive from the state. Generally, it's about 1.5 million, 1.6 million we'll receive every year. It's a little bit higher this year because there's some catch-up of, in the prior year, there were some payments that were delayed. It's finally catching up, so we're getting we're expecting about 2.6 million in for that. Otherwise, sometimes called the STIF program here. The transit fund also receives some grant funds from the county. And particularly, we're expecting 142,000 related to dial ride service from the county. Charges for service. There is a $31,000 expected in. The only route we charge for right now is called the 1X. It's down to Salem. So we are expecting $31,000. We count all that bus money here at the city. My understanding is next year, starting in July, because we share this route with Salem Chariots, they're reducing their fares on that service, so we'll have to match that. So for next year, the charges for service will be dialed down a little bit even further. Point we'll bring up during the budget. The other final one, investment revenue pops up this year because market conditions, interest rates are higher, and then we have that beginning fund balance that 12 million, pretty healthy, and that's just been built up over the past 3 years from the variety of federal grant programs that we've received, and you can see them listed there. They've got tons of acronyms, ARPA, CARES, CRISA funds, but they've really helped this fund grow, at least, and become a very well financed fund and department and program for the city. And so on the next slide, we are always going to talk about the requirements. We talked about the resources, we're going to talk about the requirements as well. We categorize those into 3 segments: personnel services, this is the labor. Coming in under budget substantially, we have a couple vacant positions, a supervisor position, and drivers. From my understanding, they reduced service very little, and they've kind of backfilled where they needed through some overtime and really scrambled to fill those bus driver positions and keep those routes going. But there'll be a variance in the personnel budget. And the materials and service budget varies year to year because when we get grant funds that have specific objectives, we'll increase materials and services. When we don't get the grant funds, we won't have the materials and services. So there's always a variance in their materials and services. Capital outlay has a huge budget. We only expense in transit when we receive delivery. Capital outlay are going to be the buses. They're very expensive. So we'll budget for them, but the delivery of buses right now, it takes a long time. It could be a year, 2 years out, you know. So we're constantly kind of playing a guessing game with the budget of that capital outlay for the transit fund. When we go down to each fund, we'll have a transfer out requirement, and that is transit's proportionate share of paying for finance, HR, legal, admin, IS. So that $616,000 is flowing back into the general fund because we're essentially charging them for services, such as our department, finance. Transfers out of the transit fund are going to be for any capital projects that they are trying to do. And one project that is anticipated completion by the end of the fiscal year is the bus stop e-readers, where you will have an LED display on the bus stops. So they're anticipating that to be completed. There's a couple other outstanding transit CIP projects that won't be completed, so that's why there's a differential there. And so we end up at that 15.8 million ending fund balance. When you see it's categorized, that ending fund balance is categorized in a couple different areas here. The unappropriated ending funding balance always represents what the council has established as the minimum threshold that they're going to allow this fund to dip down to. And it's based as a percentage of their materials and services personnel costs. So the minimum is 1.5 million. You can see they're at 15.8. The designated contingency represents specific items by council that have been designated for, that the fund balance has been designated for future use for. And that could be buses, just to have a reserve for those kind of emergency situation as well. And then the operating contingency is really just the, it's more open, I guess you'd say, for use. So that's the long and short of transit fund this year. So it's very healthy. I think we do have Dwight Brashear, the transit director, in the audience. If you guys have any additional context or questions, just let me know.
I do have
Questions?
Thank you. I do have a question. You mentioned the delay of the STIF funds, which that acronym, I believe, stands for State Transportation Improvement Fund.
State Transportation Infrastructure.
Improvement Fund.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
And we have had some meetings about that, I believe. Do we expect that delay to, are we still waiting, in other words?
That's been resolved.
It's been resolved, and we got a new, it's a pass-through. Our STIF funds are a pass-through through TriMet. We're kind of a sub-recipient of TriMet, so I don't know if Dwight wants to say any additional comments, but I believe the IGA is...
Right, we worked through it. Unfortunately, it's done on a 2-year basis, so the new agreement is coming up, and we've requested that there be no changes to the agreement other than the scope of work and the budget. And TriMet, at this point, said they're not sure they can do that, so it could get squirrely again.
Yeah, it's an amazing process. The IGA is, I don't know, 50, 60 pages long, but...
Yeah, I've had more fun, but I can't remember when, I think. So.
And I should say, all these grants and that we receive come with a lot of strings and a lot of responsibility in terms of accountability. We get a specific audit by the federal government called the single audit for coming in and looking at these, making sure we're spending the federal funds appropriately, making sure we have all the internal controls. So it adds a layer of, financial administration on these grants. And the STIF funds are similar. They do have a lot of oversight as well on them.
Right, and we figured out how to pay for all of that with using STIF funds.
Right.
So,
yeah. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have just a comment. I know that periodically we hear concerns about the employer tax portion. And the city also, that gets coupled with our policy to not charge for the transit services. But I just wanted to remind us all that our employer tax rate is 5%, and TriMet's rate is 8.037%. So we really, I think, are judicious, I think, in setting that rate, and that we should we not have a transit service and TriMet would be providing the service for us, our employers would be paying that 8%. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, it's
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
It's 8% or 0.8%.
Yeah, it's
not.
It's 0.8037%.
And escalating.
Yeah, theirs increases.
As of January 1st.
Yeah, it increases every year. They have it set up that way.
Right.
Ours has not increased since about 2008, I think, and we only increased it to help pay for the West. So, yeah.
Sorry, I had my decimal point in the wrong place.
We knew what you were talking about, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chairman, I have two questions.
Good.
Thank you. Dwight, the first question is for you. Keith mentioned that your driver shortage, you're actually increasing overtime for some of your drivers in order to make up the difference in availability of staff. Is there, are there constraints from a competitive standpoint on the pay scale that are driving some of your vacancies, or is it just overall economic conditions?
Yeah, I would say it's probably overall economic conditions. TriMet, I always use them as an example. They're about 300 drivers short and about 50 mechanics short, and we're probably closer to 5 drivers short.
So it's not significant overtime contribution then?
No.
And then I have one more question for Kevin. If you could go back to the prior slide on the revenues. On the beginning fund balance, I see the favorable results from the prior year. Do we continue to see that, just as a new member of the committee, do we see that carry forward pretty much every year?
Well, I would say this is pretty unusual for the transit fund, and it's really just been because we've been awarded those large transit grants, which in transit grants historically are capital focused. They only give us a grant for capital items, but in the past 2 years, we received these ARPA funds, what they call the CARES funds. Those are congressional acts, some acronym, and they've been able to pay for operational costs, which has significantly helped the bottom line, because we're going to have those operating costs anyway. That's what's really been the driver, I think, for the health of this fund.
Yeah, I've been in transit now, a lot of years, and I'm a rainy day guy. And so we were able to, we certainly could have taken this money and purchased buses and that type of thing. But I thought long-term, we needed to build this fund because there will come a rainy day. And when that happens, we'll be prepared for it. Other agencies didn't take that approach, and there's a day of reckoning at some point. So.
We'll just add on to that. The benefit of that too is kind of, tabling these reserve funds is when we need to perhaps buy something, we won't be encumbered by all the federal restrictions that come with a normal grant. So it buys a degree of freedom for whatever you want to do. There's some plans of expanding the parking lot or whatever, and we still may need grant funds for that essentially. But when you do these federally funded projects, it comes with a lot of strings within finance and then with across the board purchasing, and so.
I think it's important to point out that a lot of these grants are competitive in nature, and having a fund balance as we do, having the support of the council as we do, allows us to be that much more competitive because we can buy down that grant. And what that means is usually the federal government, when we buy a bus, electric buses are about $1 million a pop now. And the federal government says the minimum we'll pay pay for that bus is 80%, and you have to come up with 20. And these are competitive grants. And so if Wilsonville can say, we'll pay 30%, or we'll pay 40%, we only need 60% of your money, that moves us up in the eyes of the federal government. And so there are opportunities for us to buy down some of these grants and be a lot more competitive. We've been competitive in the years that I've been here. We've been very successful, and the result is we have a very healthy fund. I must say, when I arrived here, we were close to the minimum. And my first budget meeting, they said, "Welcome to Wilsonville. You're going broke." Seriously. And I said, "Oh my." And so I am proud that some 5 years later, we are not going broke. We are not on the watch list. I remember being on the watch list. I couldn't go anywhere. Keith's team was following me around. They'd be outside my house. They're watching me. And yeah, no, you think I'm kidding. But I remember coming off the watch list officially probably about 2 years after I arrived. And we haven't been back on the watch list, and I have no plans to ever go back onto the watch list. So we're going to manage this fund in a very responsible way. We have a great team, and so I look forward to the future. We've got a lot of good projects that I think are going to get the council and the budget committee excited in the future. So that's it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do one comment. Thanks, Mr. Chair, is I think we're beating the competition because we have a great leader like yourself leading our transit. So I appreciate the city council, but you've done an amazing job. And I think someday, 50 years from now, when I'm buried under the ground, there's probably going to be a statue of you in front of our transit system. So thanking you for all that.
That's in the contingency.
I had a hunch.
It's a bronze one. It's like the Michael Jordan one.
Well, that's very kind, but, the credit goes to Brian, and then my boss is Gina Troja, and they just trust me. They let me do what I do, and that means the world to me. And so I have no fear, and a lot of this, this funding that we receive comes as the result of some hard fights with our friends up north, and we've got one that we're battling with them right now, and I hope that we'll be victorious. We don't back down, right, Brian?
Tom Petty.
That's it. So, thank you for the
Thank you.
words. I appreciate that.
Well,
very
before
much.
you leave, Mr. Brashear, I wanted to add another comment. So totally agree with everything that's been said here. And I also wanted to note that our transit system is seen as a real collaborator with other small cities, and we're all talking about and hearing about greenhouse gases, diesel pollution, congestion on freeways, and our smart system here in Wilsonville has really been a partner around this region. So I go to these Clackamas cities meetings, and you hear about it from Tualatin, you hear about it from Sandy. We hear other mayors asking if there's some way they can get in on this. Can we swing by and give some people some rides? But it's really pretty unique, because it's very difficult for other cities now, or maybe the word is impossible, to start a transit program like this, which started here about 30 years ago. And you're right, Mr. O'Neill, we are very lucky to have Dwight here. We stand behind him in figuring out where we need to support him and continuing to advance this. And so one of the other things that really counts is that we've kept these routes going. We kept driving because we want, every transit service has such a challenge to get new people to start riding transit, and it's no small task. So I'm glad that we've kept the routes going, and look forward to doing even more service in Wilsonville as our city grows.
And I'm a transit rider myself every day.
Yes.
So, yeah, I love it.
Thank you.
Can I,
Other questions? Go ahead.
just to tag along what Julie said, I was at a League of Oregon Cities a week ago or so, sitting with some city councilors from the city of Salem, and they were commenting on how much they really liked the presentation that they had recently, and that they were really excited about the Wilsonville Smart Transit. And then also I wanted to add my comment that I'm just really impressed with how clean it always appears, the shelters and the buses.
Well,
So thank you.
you can't tell by the way I dress, but image is very important to me. Very important to me.
It's the Irish in you.
There it is. Yeah.
Valley Oops to you, Dwight.
You're all too kind. I appreciate it. So.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll kind of move through these public works funds, and I'll have Catherine walk us through these.
Thank you, Keith. Good evening. I'm Catherine Smith, the city's Assistant Finance Director. Next up is Public Works, which is comprised of roads, water, sewers, stormwater, and street widening. As we're going through these Public Works slides this evening, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to stop us. We have with us in the audience this evening Delora Kerber from Public Works. First, the road operating fund. The road operating fund accounts for the city's allocation of the state's gas tax and is used for the repair and maintenance associated with streets. The state gas tax is 38 cents per gallon, of which a portion is allocated. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. The road operating fund accounts for the city's allocation of the state's gas tax and is used for the repair and maintenance associated with streets. The state gas tax is 38 cents per gallon, of which a portion is allocated back to cities and counties based on city population. The biggest operational threats to the city's road operating fund are from people driving less and or driving more fuel-efficient vehicles. We are anticipating moving from a beginning fund balance of $8 million to ending the fiscal year at $3.4 million, a decrease of $4.6 million. As illustrated in the middle of your screen here, and as Keith touched on earlier, this includes transfer to facilities projects, which is for the Public Works complex construction.
So all those, just to interject real quick, so all those loan proceeds that we received last year were divided up and put into these road operating, the water operating, the sewer operating, and so in this current fiscal year, we're actually building the project, so they're getting transferred to the facility CIP project, so you'll see some downward swings. It's a little bit shocking, but it's just moving the loan proceeds out of these operating funds into the capital fund.
Thank you. Next, the Water Operating Fund is dedicated to operations, maintenance, and debt service on city-owned water treatment plant and the water distribution system. Resources are currently on track. This includes $9 million in current year revenues, which includes $1.4 million in sales to the city of Sherwood. There are two programs housed within this fund, the Water Distribution Fund and the Water Treatment Plant. Water distribution is responsible for the distribution system after the water is treated at the plant. The work is completed by city staff, whereas the water treatment plant is outsourced to Veolia. Requirements here are on track. Within the water distribution program, there's just a slight savings in personnel due to a current position vacancy. In total, we're anticipating moving from a beginning fund balance of $24.8 million to ending the fiscal year at $18.2 million, a decrease of $6.5 million. And as you can see here, this is mostly attributed to the transfer out for the funding of that Public Works complex. The Sewer Operating Fund is dedicated to operations, maintenance, and debt service on the water treatment plant and collection system. Resources are currently on track. This includes over $8 million in current year revenues. As you can see also here, as Keith was mentioning earlier, investment revenue throughout our funds reflect improvements in market conditions. There are three programs housed within this fund: wastewater collections, industrial pretreatment, and the wastewater treatment plant. Requirements are also on track, just a slight savings in the wastewater collection, material and services. We are anticipating moving from a beginning fund balance of $18.7 million to ending the fiscal year at $13.3 million, a decrease in $5.3 million. This includes transfers out to fund both sewer projects and the Public Works complex. stormwater fund is dedicated to the maintenance of the city's stormwater detention and diversion system and may also be used to pay for construction of improvements in developed areas of the city. Resources are currently on track. This includes $3 million in current year revenues at a rate of $11.90 for residential, no change in from the prior year.
What happened?
What happened? Oh, okay.
Requirements are on track. There's a slight savings in personnel due to a current position vacancy. Transfers out include transfers to both the stormwater projects and the Public Works complex. The fund is starting with a balance of $9.5 million and ending with a balance of $6.3 million, a decrease in $3.2 million. Next, the street lighting fund. This is dedicated to pay for street lighting costs. Resources here are on track. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about requirements here. Most notably, we wanted to thank the council and budget committee for their support in the LED street lighting conversion project. What you're seeing here, and I don't have a pointer, but I'd like to kind of draw your attention to this first line here under street lighting materials and services. What you're seeing here is a 33% decrease in material and services expenses here. This reflects an immediate return on investment this year. As you may recall, last year we finished phase 2 of this LED conversion. And this reflects an immediate 33% savings this year due to that energy efficient LED, those LED conversions. Some interesting information, facts surrounding this that we wanted to pass along that's really interesting for you to know about this. Phase 1 and 2 conversions in total resulted in the replacement of 1,764 bulbs, an estimated combined annual energy savings of 1,055,000 kilowatt hours per year, or $120,000 a year in savings, which is what we're seeing here, which is also equivalent to roughly 142 cars off the road. So anyways, that's just some interesting facts that we wanted to pass along. And, you know, we're seeing that savings directly reflected this year.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Does that savings include, the total savings, does that include the power consumption, replacement lamps, and all the associated hardware that goes with that?
I think the savings that she's referring to is the energy savings.
Energy savings,
specifically.
yes. Mm-hmm.
So, but there's also a savings too in terms of you're not replacing as many lamps.
Yeah, that gets a little more complicated because we have a relationship with PGE. So do you want to come up and try to respond to that?
Hi, Delora Kerber, Public Works Director again. So, correct. So we actually have PGE maintains our streetlights on our behalf. And so when we convert from a high-pressure sodium to a LED, we move to a different schedule. And so the savings are reflected in that number of how much we pay them per pole to maintain it on our behalf. And with LEDs, typically it's 10 years before they need to, relamp it. So then we're left with basically, if somebody runs it over, then we have to fix it. But other than that, we don't have to touch it.
What was the life cycle on the old lamps?
It would be 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, I also have a question. As a new member of, I think this one will be quick. As a new member of the committee, can you tell me, you've talked about phase 1 and 2, how many phases are involved in this project?
Well, so what did we have? Do you have the number of the total? Yeah. I know we have 1,000 lights left within the city that we need to still do. And so the plan was, we did phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was to do all the arterials, basically the Cobra heads. And then phase 2 is now going, or went into, because it was completed just December of last year. It went into the neighborhood and started doing the decorative lights, such as the acorns and the town and country lights that look kind of like a carriage lamp. And so we have done many of those, but phase 3 is coming up, and we don't know exactly when, because we're waiting for those savings to help us accrue the funds to be able to do with cash on hand. This year, we are focusing on doing lights associated with traffic signals.
So given that in phase 3 and knowing that you're already seeing real savings, have you done any projections on what your total savings will be in energy costs once the project is complete?
Did he provide that?
I do have that information, just not in front of me here, but we can provide
like
that.
$127,000 a year, I want to say?
Yes, I think so.
At full build out?
At full completion, yes.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Other questions?
Transfers out include transfers to fund the LED streetlight conversion project. The fund is starting with a balance of $1.4 million and ending with a balance of $939,000, a decrease of $551,000. And with that, I will turn it back over to Keith.
Well, I would just say, with all these public works funds, they all have very healthy reserves. They all are well above the council financial policy minimums. Wound through all of them are those savings from vacancy positions and such, but in overall, they're very good shape. So other than that, if there's any other questions for Delora as well, she controls or manages all of these public works funds. Other than that, we'll just move on, and we'll move right into talking about the Community Development Fund and the Building Inspection Fund, which we have Chris Namsu, our CD Director, and Dan Carlson, our Building Inspector, kind of to give just a brief overview of what's going on in the city, because this is one of the economic engines of the city is development. It reverberates through all these other funds, helps defray the costs of the water rates we have, and all across the board. So what's going on with development, Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Katko, Chairman Skull, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. Chris Namsu, Community Development Director for the city. I'm going to do a little look back and a little look forward, give you a little overview of some of our trends. As the more experienced budget committee members will know, the Community Development Department is a little bit like a roller coaster ride of revenues. And you'll see Dan Carlson, our building official, is going to share with you what he calls his stat tracker, which is a wide variety of statistics that we keep on building permits, on permit valuation, whole series of activities that kind of indicate the overall health of the department. So this is one of the slides that Dan will speak to. I'm going to quickly talk about housing, single-family, multifamily, and industrial in general, just to give you a sense of what we're seeing in the landscape, the types of inquiries we're receiving, and the types of development trends that we'll see going forward. Because the calendar year, really, we just turned the calendar. My stats tonight are based on the 2022 calendar year. We had a total of 46 homes constructed in the city in 2022, which is an incredibly low number, very slow production, and there are a wide variety of reasons for that downturn. If you compared it to 2021, we had 114 homes, for example, that were constructed in 2021, and these are single-family homes. The reason that the trend is down, there were a number of approvals granted last summer. I think there were 5 different approvals granted in Frog Pond West. 3 of those projects actually were unable to get into the ground by fall, so they made an intentional decision to decide to delay until spring of 2023. So we will see a number of projects come up out of the ground in 2023. We have the rising interest rate factor, which is a significant factor in the housing market, and we're all keenly aware of that, but we also lack a diverse housing product at this time. The houses that we're building in the community are very high end, and those homes are really all over $600,000. There's really nothing at any price point that's less than that. So the depth of the market is simply not there. There are very few buyers at this price point, and as a result of that, we're just seeing fewer sales across the board. There are supply chain issues that are persistent for our home builder partners, and there are labor shortages, which are also an ongoing concern. I would say that this is mostly planned and somewhat expected, as we knew that housing starts would be slow in Frog Pond West, but steady. I would say slow but steady. And we see a number of these approved subdivisions that are likely to get going in spring. And believe it or not, there are only 3 properties that remain to be entitled in Frog Pond West. So out of that entire area, only 3 of those parcels remain without a residential land use approval. And of those 3, we have had pre-application meetings on 2 of them. So there's really only 1 true holdout property in Frog Pond West, which is better than we anticipated. So my prediction, and I'm often asked to look into a crystal ball, and this is one of the difficult things in our position, is that we have to budget development revenue for a period of time that is 18 months from right now. I mean, we have to budget from July 1 all the way to the end of the fiscal year, and that's a very difficult thing to do. We often can see 6 months into the future because we communicate frequently with our development partners, and we're trying to understand how markets are affecting their investments, how they're going to proceed or not. And so we engage with them in conversations about what they see and how many homes they think they're going to buy, whether they're going to proceed with the industrial buildings or not. And so that informs us a lot. But if you get much beyond 8 to 10 months, it's nearly impossible to really know what's going to happen from an investment or a development perspective in the community. So it makes our department's revenue and our ability to budget a significant challenge, but we do a pretty decent job of it. Multifamily housing, shifting gears, there were 0 multifamily housing units constructed in Wilsonville in 2022. In 2021, there were a total of 6. There are 3 mixed-use buildings that are going to go into the village center that are into Dan's building division for plan review. That totals about 135 apartment units. Those are in for plan review. However, the timing of construction is complicated and not clear at this time, as interest rates, coupled with a difficult lending environment, according to our multifamily housing partner, is causing uncertainty about the timing of construction. So at this point, we have no ability to know when that project will actually come to market and break ground. It might be a year, it might be a year and a half. And under the code, you're allowed to keep these projects alive for a period of up to 5 years. So we just can't predict when that development will actually come forward. We're also partnering with a for-profit affordable housing developer at the Smart Central site that will bring upwards of 130 apartment units at various levels of affordability. We've just selected that partner, so that project will become much more public over the next year, and we hope to see those units within the 2-year time frame. Moving to Town Center, we have a new plan for Town Center, as everybody is aware. That plan has definitely got people interested. They've been talking to us about different ideas. I would start by saying, disappointingly, there has been absolutely no activity on the Fry's site. There has been no inquiry. There is nobody coming forward to talk to us about that property at this time. It's very frustrating. We are looking in our department to do an urban renewal feasibility study for Town Center. We hopefully are able to get urban renewal in place once the districts that we have are closed down. We hopefully will be able to stand up a new district there that would assist us with the infrastructure that's needed to create the Main Street, as well as a wide variety of other infrastructure projects that are needed to transform Town Center into a 21st century model of a vibrant, walkable community. So there have been inquiries. One inquiry that we've received is the redevelopment of the Sherry site. A small mixed-use building has come forward, and we've been engaging with those folks and having good conversations. That project feels real at this point. We'll have to see how it goes over time. There have been other bigger inquiries, and with Regal shuttering again more movie theater sites, that site continues to get interest from the community. Folks do reach out to Regal, trying to find opportunities to redevelop that property as well. Lastly, I'm going to move into the industrial market. I would say industrial has been incredibly strong for us over the past 2 years. Prior to that, for at least 6 to 7 years, it was very weak. We really didn't see any industrial development. City continues to work with partners on opportunities to advance planning and open up the Basalt Creek area. There's been a significant investment in Basalt Creek by a group called Schnitzer Properties, formerly known as Harsh Investments, and they have secured a 40-acre site where upwards of 500,000 square feet of industrial buildings could be located for employment purposes. That area is not ready for development. We don't have a master plan in place, but we have an investor who has bought property there and wants us to move as quickly as we can. So we're trying to work through all the steps associated with that. There were 3 warehouses completed in 2022. There were 2 on 95th Avenue for shredding systems. Those buildings are complete and they're occupied? Yes. Great. And we have the one on Clutter or Ritter for Coffee Creek, in Coffee Creek for the Panattoni Group. That building has now been up for about a year and has 2 tenants. ADEC, which is a large dentist group out of Newburgh, is leasing half of the building, and a company called Owens & Minor, which is a company on 95th Avenue who does medical type supplies. They are leasing the other half of the building. So 2 relatively local companies have taken down the Panattoni site. There are actually 2 projects that are in for planning review in Coffee Creek. One is for Precision Countertops, which would be a new corporate headquarters for Precision Countertops. That is on the east side of Garden Acres Road. And the other is for a company called Delta Logistics, which is a trucking company located on Commerce Circle currently, and they're looking to expand north from their property boundary up into the Day Road frontage. And they've been before us for an annexation, and they're headed to DRB for land use approval of their project. There are actually 2 other industrial buildings that are in for review, one at the Park Works Industry Center for SKB Properties, and the other west of D.W. Fritz on Beckman Road, another warehouse building for Jack Martin. All of these are in various stages of completeness or Development Review Board review. The Westland-Wilsonville School District recently submitted a new primary school in Frog Pond West, and the application is in completeness with a hearing set for later this spring. That project will hit the ground as soon as they receive approval. Construction will start this summer. They have about an 18-month construction schedule, 16 months or so, and they're going to be opening a brand new school in September of 2024 in Frog Pond West. And Zachary's Beckman Road Corridor project is being timed so that we're done and out of there at the time that we open the road, we can open a school, we can all get back to business with a brand new facility in Frog Pond West. And then Twist Bioscience has obviously completed its tenant improvement package and is operative at this time with the first batches of synthetic DNA product from what they call the Factory of the Future being sent to market over the last couple of weeks, according to various news reports. So that's good news that Twist is making progress. They've been hiring, and that tenant improvement package was a significant part of what you'll see in the stat tracker as far as driving the revenues for the department under the tenant improvement section of Dan's stat tracker. And then Dolores Public Works building is fully under construction. I wanted to mention that, as that is considered by us to be a very important and critical industrial project. So overall, 2023 looks to be a very strong year for industrial development and job creation. We just need to do a little bit better on the housing, and I think we can get there in 2023. So Dan, why don't you come on up and you can walk us through the stat tracker. We're happy to both take questions at the end, or if however you guys would like to do it, I can take questions.
Any questions right now?
I have one quick question. You mentioned the Fry's site.
Yes.
And that there's been absolutely no activity there. It's a significant acreage. It's zoned commercial, correct?
Correct.
So is there anything that the city can do to push that forward? I know that because it's so visible on I-5, the public sees it every day. And is there anything that we can do at the city level to push it forward?
We talk about this quite a bit inside the building. Controlling the site is one idea that comes to mind. Obviously, the investment there would be upwards of $25 million or so. That was what the price was going for at the beginning. But obviously, purchasing the site as an entity, as a city, potentially put you in control. Economic development, our Matt Lorenzen, my partner in crime back there, we talk about how the city could play a more significant role in that, having conversations with Mr. Cosgrove and his team as well about what that could possibly look like. I should say nothing hasn't happened. They did start out with RFPs. They brought forward development proposals. We had one company that emerged through that process, a group called the Kalita Group. They are a large multifamily developer. They were given 90 days to do due diligence. They were not given any additional time. We got to the 90 days. We made great progress. We thought we were on track for something significant and very positive at the site, and the deal fell apart between the Kalita Group and the ownership group. So since then, it's been pretty quiet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question, because I'm not familiar with I'm familiar with the building, the Fry and the Regal buildings and everything, but based on what you're talking about here, that would be, if somebody was to move in there, they would totally demo this property and then rebuild.
They wouldn't.
Retail, whatever, it might be the application.
Well, they could use the building as it is if it's a commercial use, but, if there's a change of use, then that triggers other requirements. So we have had other interest in that property.
Yeah, there's a delicate threshold of modifying the existing building and triggering the whole new code. So there's just a very fine line there. And so far, there hasn't really been anybody who's come forward able to use it the way that it is. And so it just kind of remains in this stale state, if you will. So.
Okay, thank you.
One
other question, go ahead.
Mr. Namsu, could you just describe generally the types of uses that could be applied to that site?
Well, it's again, housing is one of the main things that the town center plan opened up. The town center district, which is about 100 acres, we're sitting right in the middle of it. It includes land on all sides of the loop. Wide variety of multifamily housing, condominiums, townhomes, middle housing, apartments, all those housing types are all appropriate there. If you recall, the plan had various heights. I think the Fry site could go as high as 4 stories. If you move closer to the freeway, it was a 5-story residential. So that's mixed use mostly is what we're talking about, with retail on the main floor, residential units above. The city established a vertical housing development zone to help incentivize that type of vertical construction with the retail on the main floor and the housing above. So those are the types of uses. Any retail use is really appropriate. Drive-throughs were discouraged in the town center plan. Big box retail, like Fry's, is discouraged, not allowed in the plan that was adopted. So that building is unique, and the goal would be to see it turn into something much more valuable for the community over time.
Other questions? Thank you.
All right, good evening, members of the Budget Committee. My name is Dan Carlson. I serve as the city's building official. I just want to take a couple of brief moments to walk you through what Chris refers to our stat tracker. It is part of a much larger body of data that we keep and collect and update on a regular basis, depending on what development is doing within the community. So the first slide that you see here just really gives you a good picture of a longer term view of what I liken as a kind of a roller coaster ride, especially if you look at the total number of all permits, which is the blue dotted line at the top of your slide there. You can see it traces back into the previous recessionary period. And right now, if you look at where we're at today with just finishing 2022, the most current data that we have, we're at 904 permits that we issued in 2022. And you kind of you can kind of trace it back, to 2010 and 2009, 2011, somewhere in that threshold is where we crossed a similar threshold previously. So overall, the number of permits is really trending downward, and we're seeing that bear fruit. If you could go to the next slide, please. I want to give you a little more detailed view of what was underneath that dashed line on the previous slide. So it just kind of gives you a better perspective, I think, of, what each individual segment in our development activity is doing. So the red line is our commercial TIs, remodels, and additions. And generally speaking, this red line is, in my perspective, very, very healthy in Wilsonville, and it has been over the course of quite a number of years. That number ending in 2022 at 203, while it is trending downward from 284 the year prior, that is still a very healthy number, in my opinion. If we saw it dip further into the 150 range, then it would be cause for some concern. But I think right now, people are generally pretty tentative about their future plans, but they're still moving forward with redeveloping their offices. There are a lot of remodels, additions, tenant improvements. So that's good news. The one that, I think Chris really hit it out of the park with describing this is, you can see the purple line is the trending for new single-family permits. We had an all-time high of 381 single-family permits back in 2015. You look at it where it's at today at 46, which is quite a significant drop. We actually had 3 months in our prime building season last April, May, and June, where we did not issue any new home permits. 0, and I have never seen that before in the 27 years I've been doing this. So that has been alarming, quite honestly, but the good news is, you find the bottom somewhere and it's only upward from there. So that's kind of how I choose to look at it. We are forecasting, if we looked at this on a fiscal year range, given this is a calendar year view that you're looking at, we're anticipating closing out the fiscal year that we would have another 26 new home permits that we would issue yet from now until July. So we're looking good there overall for next fiscal year. I think we're forecasting 64 new home permits as compared to what you see on your graph at 46. So we hear, a lot of different things from builders. We still hear supply chain issues. We hear issues with labor. We hear, obviously, issues that we're all hearing about with lending being challenging. We heard from Keith earlier about the Treasury, about having another, 0.25% increase in lending rates. So that's going to bear itself out. But I have to say that builders that are in the game now are, in my opinion, pretty resilient. They have figured out ways to move forward, and we're seeing that, that start to turn. So I could go on and on and on about this. I won't. The last slide here just sort of gives you a reflection of the value of permit activity. And so the reason this is kind of important is that a lot of our permit fees are valuation based. So when we, when we ask or we issue a permit for a new commercial building or a new house, we're asking for the value of the project, and then that we compare to a fee table that gives us the building permit fees. So when you see this go up and down and you correlate it to what our revenues are looking like, which Keith is going to share with you in a minute, it's reflective of that valuation curve as well. For the most part, there are some nuances that I could explain if you're interested, but in the interest of time, we'll keep it at that. Happy to answer questions. Yes.
Maybe you already covered this and I missed it, but where are the multifamily permits?
The multifamily permits in this chart would be under the commercial, new commercial permits, or if it was a remodel or addition, it would be under commercial TIs, remodels, additions. So either the green line or the red line.
I have a question. Could you go back to the first slide? Is that possible? Can you help me understand when we look at the total number of permits by category and you add up all of the subcategories on the bottom, it doesn't equal the total number of permits? And I'm sure there's a very simple explanation for that, but can you explain that to me?
So there are other permits like plumbing, mechanical, trades types of permits that we don't necessarily capture because it just really clutters up the graph, quite honestly. So for clarity purposes, we just try to cut right to the chase and give you the overall total and then delineate some of the subcategories. So that's
Perfect.
why that's...
Thank you.
Yeah. Good question.
So I have a question. Keith, could you go to the next slide, please? I understand, that we have near-term headwinds, inflationary headwinds and all that, supply chain issues and all, but I'd be curious to understand the reason, if I look at the purple line, it's single-family permits, and that's been in decline since 2015. And, is that due to the fact that I think the largest development in Wilsonville was Villa Bois, and it's pretty much built out now. And
Correct.
Is that due to the fact that there's no other large developments in the city?
Yes. So the peak in 2015 was really Villa Bois. What you're seeing there is very representative of even from 2013, that whole spectrum of between 2013 and I would say really 2018. That was the mass of Villa Bois, just the rapid level development. We could see something similar to that with Frog Pond, but Frog Pond has really paced itself out, I think, quite a bit more. And we don't quite yet have Frog Pond east and south ready to develop yet. It's just been master planned right now. So once those are master planned and released for development, we could see some similar numbers of that potentially.
So with the quantity of permits that are out there in terms of commercial property and single family, what's the average turn time on those, from permit to close?
So I'll try to answer your question, and if I don't answer it, please ask again to clarify. So our performance targets for residential plan review, if the lot is ready to go, ready to build on, we have a 2-week plan review turnaround for residential, 3 weeks for commercial. And we do track stats as to whether or not we're hitting those targets. And when we don't, we're very quick to adjust and adapt with outside help, with contract help that we keep. Even so, we have a retiree that will help us from time to time as well. So did I answer your question?
Actually, it was from the time the permit was issued to the time that the project was complete.
Oh, so generally for residential, what I hear from my builder counterparts, on the quick end, 90 days. And, I know when I built my house, it took me 9 months. So,
I think from a commercial standpoint, their time is money. So they have construction loans, so they probably 180 days tops.
Really, that quick?
Yeah, it depends on the size of the project. You know, I think Chris mentioned the middle school or the Frog Pond Primary School. I think they're looking at an 18-month build out for that, 18-month to 2 years. So it just really depends on the size and the complexity of the project. Right. We've got a $70 million project at the state Department of Administrative Services. It's a giant tenant improvement. That's a 2-year project. Very, very complex project.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have a question. Keith, could we go to the next slide where the revenues? I believe I recall that, of course, not anticipating the pandemic in any way, we approved an increase in the permit fee.
Yes.
And was that just at the beginning of 2020? Was that the fiscal year that we?
Your memory is good. It was 2020.
Okay. And so my question is, given that not everything is flat, but I'm wondering if the spike in the total valuation of the permits is reflective of an increase in the numbers of permits, or is it reflective of the increase in the fee?
Sure. So this is just representing the value of projects, what they state the value of it is. It doesn't really, it can correlate to fees, but it really doesn't. It doesn't. There would be a fee chart if you wanted to look at that as well to track how the fees have adjusted. But you're correct. We adjusted fees in 2020 because we hadn't adjusted them for 14 years. We adjusted them in 2020, and then we built into that an annual cost of living adjustment that allows us to keep pace with what the market is doing so that we don't fall behind again.
And did we also approve an increased staffing in that year as well?
No, we actually are going to be decreasing staffing, to be honest with you, not because of layoffs or anything like that, but because we have gained some tremendous efficiencies. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it's forced us to do all of our work completely electronically. Mm-hmm. So, we've been able to sort of, as people have moved on, just not fill positions and figured out a way to really become more efficient with what we do as a result. So I'm really proud of that. It's been pretty exciting to see this real paradigm shift and transition in our work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I was going to say, that is something to be proud of. We're hearing a lot of things tonight about forward-thinking savings and looking at ways to do work more efficiently where you can. So, great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, thanks, Dan. So that kind of paints a picture, and kind of like everything in life, it's always then reflected in the income statement. So here we go. We'll talk about their budget. The building fund, which Dan is in charge of, is dedicated, the resources are dedicated to the administration and enforcement of the building code. So the revenue is dedicated, has to stay in this fund. It can't be used for anything else. And as Dan mentioned, and Chris mentioned too, when we look at the CD fund next, it's a bit of a roller coaster ride here for revenues as development ebbs and flows, as well as, Dan mentioned the fees tend to be valuation based, because that depends on the composition of the development that's happening. It also, with that roller coaster, it's timing too. Sometimes planning fees come in the year preceding, and then the building inspections happen in the subsequent year. So the revenues don't always kind of meet the expenditures in both the CD fund and the building fund. But we're looking at the building fund is in pretty decent position. It has a beginning fund balance of 3.1 million, as you see on the screen here. And you can see the license and the permits. It's slowed down, so that revenue line has been reduced, and we budgeted for that reduction, and it's under budget, and it's significantly down from at least 45% from the prior year actuals as well. So that still, we're estimating 1.2 million in licenses and permits to come in. So what that means for this fund is we started at that 3.1 million, and we're predicting just $149,000 decrease in the fund balance. So they'll have an ending fund balance of 2.9 million, and that will be their budgeted beginning fund balance as we go into the next year. Really nothing too interesting to flesh out in terms of variances. They have their staff vacancies, so they have savings there. And like all funds, they have a transfer out to the general fund for the finance HR. That's always right on target. And that will be the building fund. Now the CD fund, a little bit different. This fund is dedicated to the civil engineering. The economic development is housed in this fund. Planning, urban renewal management is housed here, stormwater management, and natural resources. So it's an eclectic kind of combination of functions that the city needs. In this fund, we have on the watch list the financing of this fund as well is in really a metamorphosis, or there's this transformation that's happening because as the urban renewal agent plans close, the year 2000 district in the West Side district, they historically have been able to charge that urban renewal, those urban renewal plans, a charge for service. And you can see the charge for service here is declining precipitously this year and will be reduced again next year. What that may entail needing is you can see the transfer line here called operating. There's $854,000 coming in. Part of that is $450,000 contribution from the general fund. So when those urban renewal districts or those urban renewal plans close, we're going to be, we'll have an influx of property tax because they're closed, and there is a tangible correlation that then this could be used to fund these programs, such as city planning, which is arguably something that, you know, the general government could have more contribution for that kind of endeavor. So there'll be a shift in how this fund is financed. It's starting with a beginning fund balance of 2.4 million, and by the end of the year, here we'll go through all the requirements. There's admin, there's engineering, there's planning in this fund. By the end of the year, they're going to drop down to 1.4 million as an ending fund balance. That's a drop of $1.1 million. That's still, that $1.4 million ending fund balance is still above the council policy of 20% of operational expenses. But when we come back in May to budget this fund, we're going to really have to take a look at the funding sources for this fund, and it's a vitally important. All these functions in this fund are vitally important to the growth and success of this community. When you talk about planning, you talk about economic development. So it'll be a little challenge of how we're going to finance those, and how the effect of the urban renewal plan closures, how we can mitigate and deal with that in terms of financing this fund. So just to...
Does that rise then to the level of a watch?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is on the, you know, but like I mentioned, it's manageable because with those urban renewal plan closures, we're getting that tax increment now, it's just coming in differently. It's coming in as an increase. We'll see property taxes or the revenue increase next year because of the closure of the districts, and then it'll increase again the following year because of the closure of the West Side District. That tax increment is what I'm kind of talking about. So just the way we finance this fund will change over the next year, and we'll bring that back in May when we budget for it, and we can talk a little bit more about it. The license and permits in this fund are all the engineering permits, and there's planning permits that, get assessed. And that is part of that roller coaster ride too. They come in at different points in the planning process. So other than that, in general, yeah, this fund is on the watch list, and, we'll continue to monitor in it. These are all the departments, like I mentioned. There's CD admin, and that houses the economic development. They're pretty much on track. Engineering, we're down a couple of engineers. It puts the fund in a little bit of a spiral too, to not have the engineers, because then they can't do the capital projects, and the capital projects, in a sense, can fund this fund, because then we can, a lot of times the capital projects themselves are funded through SDC charges or grants, and so with the engineers billing their hours to certain projects that have those kind of funding streams, that overhead charge is allowed to come back into the CD fund. So vacancies don't always create, well, they don't create any revenue. They create some expenditure savings, but then they reduce sometimes the revenue as well. So, and engineers right now, of course, are very hard to hire. Planning, we're on track in general with their personnel and materials and services. So that is the Community Development Fund. If there's no questions, we can move on to our final fund, which is the big one, the general fund. And when we talk about the resources here, this is mostly property taxes. And property taxes, of course, every year we have a 3% annual increase. That's part of that Measure 5 passed many, many years ago. Assessment can only go up 3% a year. But the city itself grows, so we get more property tax by the growth of the city, the development that happens, that more people in the pool create that larger property tax base. And as I mentioned, this current year in the year 2000 district, we did reduce the increment we're taking for the urban renewal district, so that freed up some money that that pushed up the general fund property tax revenue collections as well. So $9.2 million in property taxes. Just for a frame of reference, the urban renewal districts also collect about $9 million. So combined total, we receive about $18 million in property taxes every year from the urban renewal in the general fund. Just quickly going down the line here, we have the hotel motel transit tax. It's ticking upwards, picking up from the COVID. We have our franchise fees, intergovernmental revenue. We received a $5.3 million American Recovery Act grant. Part of that was received last year, and $2.5 million was received this year. That's one of those grants that we are allowed to spend on operating, as well as a host of other endeavors. So that is nice contribution to the general fund this current year. And we don't have any more questions on the resources. We'll go down. There's a little bit more resources.
I do have a question. I'm
Sure.
sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, interrupt me.
If I ask.
As it goes. Go
Two questions, actually, on the franchise fees. Can you share with me what the definition is of a franchise fee?
It's basically a fee assessed on giving certain entities the right-of-way rights to our city, like to run electrical lines throughout the city.
PGE, Northwest Natural, Republic Services, our garbage company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some telecom companies pay a right-of-way fee.
Right.
Comcast, I don't know.
And that's passed on, right? Isn't it passed on to the citizens?
Some not.
A certain percentage, if it's a certain percentage above what the state statute allows, then that portion is passed on.
So our citizens can see that on their.
Right.
Yes,
On their
the portion,
Got it.
the portion that's above that, yes.
Okay, and then secondarily, if I look at the ARPA funding, that 2.8 million, do we anticipate that is over?
It's over this year. We
So-
received 2.8 in the prior year and 2.8 this year.
So if I look at the balance, if I look at that 2.8 and we subtract that out, we're in a much different position.
Well, we're much a different position in terms of recurring revenue.
Got it.
It never really was a recurring revenue. It's totally, just a really nice thing that happened in these past 2 years.
That's nice to say.
Right. I mean, in the context of a very difficult period of time. So for the city's, ending fund balance, I guess I would say that. In that intergovernmental, though, is the 1.4 million that we received as part of the Clackamas County Library District. State shared revenues are flowing into that line, which state shared revenues are like the cigarette tax. We get a portion of that. Liquor tax, we get a portion of that. And this generic thing called state shared revenues, that comes in there as well. So.
And that's all per capita based.
Yeah.
And opioid settlement money?
Yeah, I mean, that's so limited. I think it's like $10,000.
Yeah, so
That
far.
would go in there, though.
So far.
Yeah.
With those that opiate money, though, we will need to eventually get a plan of action in terms of how we're spending it, because it has to be spent a certain way. So it's just starting to come in. And that's the lawsuit litigation against a collection of pharmaceutical retail outlets who, and so we get it. It was a class action lawsuit, so we get part of that. Is that a very high level summary?
Yeah, that's
Right.
correct. Yeah.
If you want to, so that's that, yeah.
There will be others.
Sure. One comment, or actually question, the franchise fees. It doesn't cover all things going through Wilsonville.
Right, I think you're probably talking about the power lines.
Pipeline, they pay franchise fees.
No, they're federally regulated. Yeah, they're exempt.
Yeah.
Zero pipeline that doesn't pay anything. Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
And then there was just some additional total resources of 49 million. We're starting out with a very healthy beginning fund balance of 19.5 million, and we'll end in the general fund at approximately 16 or 18.4. So there is a decrease in this fund, and we'll have Catherine kind of walk us through and explain that in the next few slides.
So general fund requirements, thank you, Keith. Some anticipated savings here across the board, as we've discussed previously with other funds and departments, are most notably personnel. And as we go through the departments here throughout the general fund requirement slides, you will see this kind of notated here. We have a few vacancies throughout the general fund. As an example here, in IT, so our information systems, we have a vacancy here. Also, most notably, materials and services, we have some decreases across the board. We've just, this is an area in materials and services, we always want to make sure that we're underspending. So, we may budget very conservatively here. So anyways, that's where you're seeing those savings. Again, here in legal, we have a vacancy there. Law and code enforcement, that is majority of those expenses are all contract services. That is coming in right on track. Court, again, just overall savings and various line items there. The rest of the departments here, human resources, public works, admin, all on track. Some savings that we see here, most notably in Public Works facilities, the capital outlay here. We do have savings here, just unused funds for the Art Tech and Kiva building. Everything else is on track for parks maintenance, parks and rec, library.
And I think, just to interject, part of the unused funds from the Art Tech Kiva is just, this is ongoing discussion on the reevaluation of those buildings, and so there's been a little bit of delay in some of the original plans that were budgeted for capital outlay until kind of figure out what's going to happen with those two buildings.
Thank you, Keith. This brings us to transfers. As we've discussed with other funds as well, transfers out here are mostly comprised of transfers to fund capital outlay projects. As we see here, transfers for park projects, transfers for facilities. This is the portion for the Public Works complex. In total, we anticipate moving from a beginning fund balance of $19.5 million to ending the fiscal year at $18.4 million, a decrease of $1 million. And this brings us to the general fund 5-year forecast.
I have a question. Could we just back up one slide, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
And just a general process question on the ending fund balance, where the council says that, you need 15 or 20% above to maintain the account. Is that adjusted for inflation each year?
Yeah, because it's essentially, when we establish the budget for each fund, it's just a percentage of the materials and service and personnel service in that fund.
So it just carries over?
Yeah, so the extent that those materials and service and personnel services go up, then the restriction goes up as well. One thing on this slide, so that the council, minimum council policy for the general fund would be $3.3 million. The designated fund contingency of that $6.5 million, in your budget books, towards the back of the adopted budget is a worksheet or a display of all the designated contingencies in the city, including the general fund, which has various, you can see what that 6.5 million is comprised. It's in one of the latter chapters of the adopted budget book. And then so that remaining 8.6 would be kind of the unrestricted, as you will, operating contingency. And you can see we originally budgeted an expectation of 10.8. We're actually closing the year at 18.4 million ending fund balance, and a lot of that has to do with the ARPA funds that have come in, and then just savings from, as Catherine mentioned, just some of the delays of the CIP projects. We're not transferring general fund money out to those projects yet. It'll probably be rolled forward into the future years because those projects will exist. It's just taking a little bit more time. And then the other part of it, we started the year, we had budgeted a $15.8 million beginning fund balance last year. We actually had a $19 million, and that was because of the award of the ARPA money in the previous years. It bumped up the fund balance. So it's kind of been building in this fund as well, somewhat kind of related to the transit fund. It really helped the intergovernmental piece of this fund in terms of resources from those ARPA money.
Mayor Fitzgerald?
Thank you. Well, speaking of these ARPA funds, I see that one of the uses of those funds is going to be coming into play soon with the hiring of the behavioral health specialist. Is that right?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we talked to council about earlier, yes. So I think we I think we said that 3 years of that would be fully funded through ARPA funds.
Yeah.
The reality is all that stuff's rolled into the general fund,
And
but
it takes a long time to get it going, but
yeah, we finally got that person on board, and I think we've been talking about that for 18 months, so.
But another example, some of these things just take a long time. And any other highlight on other ARPA uses that are coming up soon, Brian?
Well, we had talked about using some of that money for SDC buy-downs for the TOD project, the Transit-Oriented Development Project. Trying to remember.
The other thing is we increased the cleaning, the janitorial staff of the Parks and
Yes.
Rec. So we conceptualized it as paying for additional, is it classified as
Janitorial
janitorial?
services. Correct, yeah.
And, for the hygienic reasons of tangentially related to viruses and COVID, so the Parks and Recreation restrooms cleaned up.
The broadband,
Right.
different direction of
Yeah,
money,
broadband
but
was another one that we've talked about setting money aside for as well.
Yeah, and we can bring all that kind of back more in when we come back in May and talk
Okay.
about that as a framework too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you wanted to kind of briefly cap off with this 5-year forecast, Catherine.
Yes. And we'll tie in the question that I heard about the financial policy minimum on here as well. So going back to the 5-year forecast, a 5-year financial forecast is meant to complement the annual budget process and help us monitor the city's financial ability over the next 5 years to continue to effectively provide services. As illustrated in the graph before you, the history of revenue and expense are closely linked, with reserve balances typically used periodically for one-time expenses, typically CIP projects. As illustrated here, city fund balances are significantly higher than the council-directed financial policy minimum. Updated financial forecasts for all city funds will be included with the annual budget presentation in May. Any questions surrounding what you see here, or?
And the 5-year, we do a 5-year forecast for all the operating funds, and it's in the adopted budget book in the back of the adopted budget too. It's constantly updated, and it'll be updated again when we present the budget in May. We don't always get a lot of time to talk about it because the year budget consumes most of those budget meetings that we have in May, but it's there for reference, and it's our kind of guide too as we plan for the future too for these operating funds. We're constantly assessing and reassessing the financial positions of all these funds. And so, like I mentioned, you'll be receiving this 23-24 budget book. Our goal is for April 29th. We'll deliver it or make it available for your review. And then May 17th will be our first budget committee meeting. They're back-to-back nights. May 17th, May 18th, and it'll be format as we have in the past. There's a third budget meeting scheduled. We've never historically needed it. That'll be the following week. And then once the budget committee approves the budget, then we can take it to council, and that is scheduled for June 5th, who then also have to adopt the budget based on the budget committee recommendation, and that'll happen on June 5th. So those are some dates to mark on your calendar for now, and that kind of wraps up this 5-year mid-year review. But if there's any other questions, you can reach out to me at any time as for clarification on any financial issue. As every month or every quarter, we are sending out these quarterly financial reports. Our senior accountant has done an excellent job of consolidating that and forwarding those to you. So when you see those and you have questions, let me know. It's mostly about trying to educate everybody on the finances of the city, and for you to review and let me know if you see something that as well that we need to review as well. So that'll be kind of it for now until we see you again in May.
Questions, comments?
This is kind of going back earlier in your presentation. I remembered you talked about the gasoline tax and that was down, and it seemed like part of the explanation was because of the number of electric vehicles is increasing. So is that something that's a concern for revenue, or is that something that can just be easily made up?
It can't really be. Well, there's some alternatives that the state has been floating as an idea, because electric vehicles use the roads as well. So the gas tax right now is used to maintain the roads. And so those fuel-driven vehicles are paying for the roads, where as an electric vehicle, and sometimes electric buses now, electric semi-trucks are probably on the way, and those are heavily impact on roads. So there will have to be, so the gas tax is in a state of decline, I would say, because cars are getting more fuel efficient. It's kind of this weird, really, relationship. We want this fuel efficient type of things to happen, but we just need to figure out a way then to pay for the infrastructure that exists on it. So it's one to just watch for right now for us. I mean, it's affecting every city across the state.
And those are all discussions that the League of Oregon City has, and when we're doing our lobbying, we have those conversations. But yeah, they need to figure out the electric side of that in terms of how to make sure that people that are trying to do the right thing by the environment and from a cost standpoint are also helping to pay for the maintenance of the road network.
Other questions, comments? I'd like to thank the finance team and the city team. Excellent job, as always. And do I need to get a motion to adjourn? Or can I just adjourn?
You can just adjourn.
Yes.
Okay. If there's no other questions or comments, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Magic.
Yeah.